How did the Spice Girls and a shoe collection lead to being in charge of $8 billion?
So I had a real sense of, girls can do anything. It was the 1990s.
Rhiannon McKinnon is one of the few women to lead a KiwiSaver investment fund. A former CEO of the Year and now a CEO coach, she asks why.
I often think it's strange that with investments, which, has no physicality or anything like that, why a female wouldn't find it as interesting as a male.
She also gives her thoughts on the gender pay gap.
Which I thought was pretty shocking.
And the American purge of diversity, equity and inclusion. Welcome to the NBR Podcast's 50th episode. I'm your host, Simon Shepherd. Promoting diversity, equity and inclusion, DEI, is not on trend.
We've ended the tyranny of so-called diversity, equity and inclusion policies all across the entire federal government and indeed the private sector and our military.
That's America. This is New Zealand.
We campaigned on equality. We campaigned against woke ideals, and that's what the coalition's about.
The stats in New Zealand reveal the imbalance between men and women in the workforce. Women are paid on average 8.2% less than men. And in terms of leadership, of the top 50 companies on our stock exchange, 6 had female CEOs in 2024. But Rhiannon McKinnon, the former CEO of Kiwi Wealth, knows how to break that glass ceiling. At 42, you are one of the youngest CEOs of a top 10 investment organisation. How did that happen?
There was a change in CEO and there was quite a sudden change and I got a phone call to ask me whether I would step up to be acting CEO while they were going to conduct a search. And so I said, yeah, absolutely, I'd love to do that. So I did that in about February, must have been 4 years ago now. And they never did conduct that search in the end. I think I did a reasonably good job. They gave me a lot of permission to run it like I actually was the CEO. And I think in that period of time, I was able to prove that I was worthy of keeping that job.
Is that something that you were chasing?
Was it something I was chasing? It was something that a few months beforehand I thought for the first time, if I had that opportunity, I would like to step up into it, but I don't think I would say I was chasing it.
It wasn't like a long-term career planning goal, not just to be that particular CEO, but a CEO?
No, it wasn't, Simon, actually. I had, various people who would suggest those sorts of things to me, and I'd actually bat it down and say, no, that's not what I'm aiming for. And also potentially not thinking I was capable of it.
Right.
So I think it was something I didn't really kind of put myself, it felt like quite a sort of a big thing to do and not something that I might be able to do. But over time, I started to think about, what I might be able to do in that sort of position and, eventually kind of thought to myself, yeah, if I had that opportunity, I would take it with both hands.
Right. And you did. At the time, I think you were the only woman to head up a KiwiSaver fund, apart from, say, the CEOs of the major banks. But you, in particular, were the CEO of a KiwiSaver fund. Is that a topic that we should talk about, or should we just say, it doesn't really matter that you're female?
You can talk about whatever you want to, Simon. There aren't many female CEOs of investment management. As you say, there's a lot of bank CEOs that are female, and I think that's very well represented in New Zealand. I think in the investment space, it's even more male-dominated, and I sort of saw that when I was trying to look for a chief investment officer as well. It's one of those things where, males seem to be more attracted into the investment industry than females, and so you have fewer females rising to the top, I suppose.
Yeah, but why is that?
I don't know. I often think it's strange that with investments, which, has no physicality or anything like that, why a female wouldn't find it as interesting as a male. I think it's a good intellectual challenge. I think we can look at things just as and turn puzzles over and do the maths as much as anybody else. I've done some work trying to attract people in at that very bottom, at the beginning out of university. But even when you look at sort of finance degrees and economics degrees, it seems to have that male skew. But I just don't see any reason why females can't follow that path. And I go and talk at schools and so forth and try and convince particularly young women to think of finance as a potential career path.
What attracted you to that career path? I mean, if it's all male dominated, why you? What is it about that attracted you to it?
That's a really good question. I've got two older brothers. I've got one of them said to me years and years ago when I was about 15 that, careers in the City of London was something to consider. I went to an all-girls school where we were taught we could do anything that we possibly wanted to do. So I had a real sense of, girls can do anything. It was the 1990s. I mean, it was the Spice Girls and girl power
I was just
and
going to
everything
say
else.
the Spice Girls, yeah.
It really was. So, I thought that could be interesting. I also knew, Simon, it was well paid, and I often joke and quip that I had a shoe habit that I wanted to fund. But I certainly wanted to get into London and enjoy a lifestyle, and I wanted to have a good starting graduate salary.
Yeah.
So that attracted me. I'm from the UK, so for my A-levels I did economics and maths, but I also did history, and that was the subject I read at university. But I did have the kind of mathematical background that kind of probably helped me leapfrog from history into finance.
Right. So it took you all the way to the top. If we just fast forward, and there you are, you're running the retirement savings for 220,000 people who have invested $8 billion. At the time, what kind of responsibility was that?
Well, it's a huge responsibility. That's an awful lot of people that you're looking after the retirement savings of. So you're really trying to make sure that you're delivering the best possible, firstly, investment returns, but we also spend a lot of time trying to make sure that that customer experience and your understanding of finances, we made that as easy as possible as well. We really believe if you can engage with your finances, if you make active decisions, if you actually decide to move out of a default fund into something that might be suited to you better, or even just engage in that process, you will end up with sort of better outcomes long term. So we were really focused on two things, the investment returns, but also the engaging customer experience.
Now that you're out of the industry, I just want you to sort of look back into it. So KiwiSaver as an industry, it's really maturing, right? It's now worth about 117 billion as an industry in New Zealand. And some KiwiSaver funds are lobbying hard to invest more in growth assets, particularly alternative assets. And I was just wondering, when you were in charge, was that something that you wanted to do or was on your pipeline of work?
Yeah, but not only in the pipeline, we actually did it. I think we were the first KiwiSaver to invest in one of Movac's funds, which is one of the private equity companies here.
Okay, so you were ahead of the game. Okay.
Yeah, ahead of the game. So we invested in, I think it was Movac Fund 5, we felt that by the time we got to a certain size, you could start to look at those sort of more liquid alternative assets that might give you good diversification in the portfolio. But, liquidity obviously is an issue with KiwiSaver, but we didn't have more than, I think, around 100 to 130 million committed. And I don't think we even got to that level of investment while I was still chief. Out of 6 billion we had in KiwiSaver at that time. So it's a pretty small percentage we had. But we did want to start down that track, and we certainly did more research into other funds as well.
So it's not a surprise to you that other funds are going down this road as well, I would imagine, especially now that KiwiSaver, fund sizes are bigger. In fact, but as you just pointed out, less than 2% of KiwiSaver funds are actually invested in alternative assets. And if you compare that to the Aussies, which we have to do, they're just under 20%. What do you think about that?
Well, I think it's also a sign of the maturity of the industry, Simon. We look back at, I think it's about 25 years the Australian super industry has on KiwiSaver. So I'd be really interested to know what that stat looked like on Australia 25 years ago.
Right.
I think that can potentially grow over time, but I think it is around partly making sure you are able to access that money, very fast for the people who are trying to withdraw those funds. So there is a balancing act there. I don't know whether we'll hit 20. I don't know what the right number or the magic number is, but I'd expect that 2 to 3% will probably continue to grow for a while. That's my guess.
Okay. Well, let's take it one step further. KiwiSaver funds and cryptocurrency.
Yes.
What are your thoughts?
Not for me, I suppose.
Not for you?
I think, no, and maybe again it's an asset class that needs to mature. I think while I was CE, I mean, we did see some funds go into crypto and make fantastic returns over the short term. And I think you always need to be looking at new asset classes and so forth. But I do think it's still a very speculative asset. And I think when you're when you're investing for the long term, for people's retirement, I don't think there's necessarily a need to go into that sort of very high level of speculation.
Right.
But potentially maybe for those growth funds, the ones with the really high risk mandates, maybe that's somewhere that people would like to go. It's certainly we hadn't got there yet at Kiwi Wealth when I was there in my tenure. But I suppose never say never. But personally, I'm not a crypto investor.
Okay. All right. We'll leave that asset class to other people. Just finally, you just mentioned how the Australian super scheme is a lot more mature than ours.
Yes.
Are there lessons, looking at the Aussies, are there lessons, do you think, that we could learn from there to implement here? I'm thinking about contribution rates and things like that.
Yeah, I'm quite a big believer in higher contribution rates. I think the 3 plus 3% is not enough to retire comfortably for most Kiwis. And I think that there's a sort of a false sense of security that comes with 3 plus 3. I know it's difficult in terms of affordability to keep sort of, increasing those numbers, both from a corporation side and from an individual. But I think, trying to move it towards some higher numbers. I mean, Australia's at something like 9% individual, isn't it?
Yeah, and I think they're going 11% company as well, or 12% company.
Yeah, it's huge. Yeah, it's huge. I mean, out of my top of my head, and this based on not a lot of research, if any, Simon, I think if you get to 5 plus 5, that would be great.
Okay.
And I'm not even sort of having to sort of say that with my company will benefit from that anymore. But I genuinely feel that you need to invest more in your KiwiSaver to get that outcome at the end.
Right. Okay. Well, let's look at what you're doing now. After a couple of years off, after leaving Kiwi Wealth, you are a CEO coach. Now, is that for people who want to be CEOs or are CEOs?
Oh, a little bit of both. I mean, I talk mostly about new and aspiring CEOs. So I think the main idea is to target it at people who've just stepped in, because I think that's an experience that is still quite fresh in my memory. And I felt that when I first sort of stepped into that role, and I, sort of diligently sort of looked for training courses to work out how I'd get my head around it and what I needed to know. And there's a big change stepping from C-suite into CEO, and you're suddenly covering obviously the whole company and a whole load of specialities that you've never had anything to do with before. But there was nothing specifically at those new CEs, so I thought I might be able to contribute something in that arena. So
right.
I sort of put together my own curriculum, decided to try and make a lot of it sort of digital and email so that you could receive it and learn it in bite-sized chunks while you're actually really busy as well. Like the idea of taking a week out of the job in your first 6 to 12 months is really hard. There's just so much to be done that I'm trying to make it sort of really easy to deliver and sort of consume.
So you're not trying to teach current CEOs new tricks, because I would imagine that's pretty hard.
I think it is pretty hard. Maybe one day. But I think, there's plenty of CEOs who know more than I do about their own industries, companies, and have more experience. But for the new ones, I've also kind of extended it into a sort of a C-suite leadership's essentials as well. So looking at the people stepping into C-suite and in that area as well. So just trying to cover that area of, a career, I suppose.
So when you are looking around at CEOs, I mean, I just wonder, because you're in this space now, do you have any CEOs that you look at and say, that is the kind of leadership that I emulate and that everybody should aspire to? Do you have any role models?
I mean, everyone should aspire to, I think, is a strong word. I think, there are elements that you like about people, and to say everyone should be like somebody else, I think sort of, I think you've got to find the right mould and the fit.
Right.
Coming from financial services, I look at the likes of Antonia Watson, and I think what she's done at ANZ in terms of making it more open and bringing more women in and so forth is something that I've quite admired. I'm a huge fan of Steve Jurkovic. I've worked with him a lot in his role at KiwiBank, and I think what he's done there at the bank over the last, 6 years, maybe more. I think he has managed to grow it. I think he's made it really even deeper in terms of what it's trying to do for New Zealand, and he's managed to really grow the business as well. So, and he's taken on some difficult challenges along the way. So I hate to be sycophantic about Steve on record, but
you are now.
It's too late now. And
you could say,
he's
you could
also
also
been
say,
very, very good mentor to me over
all
time
right.
as well.
You could also say to him, Steve, I want your job at some stage.
I don't think I'd tell him that.
Okay, all right. We won't tell him then. Okay. When we deal with CEOs, I understand there's a lot of commitments and a lot of, especially listed CEOs of listed companies and those kinds of things. But we often find that CEOs are not that willing really to put themselves out there and talk about controversial things. As an ex-CEO, do you understand that, or do you think that's something that we need to work on in the business community?
Yeah, it's quite interesting. I mean, I think there was a period there when Black Lives Matters were at its sort of core, and I spoke to my brother, who's a CEO in the UK, and he was sort of saying it's really hard because suddenly I'm meant to have an opinion on this and sort of be out there stating what I really think, and I'm not sure what it's got to do necessarily with my business and so forth. I think you've got to make sure that if you're taking a stand on things, it needs to be in line with the values of your company and what you're all about. So, you've seen all sorts of things happen where some companies have tried to take a stand and it's really backfired or not seen to be genuine. I think if you can stand out about issues, it's got to be in line with your kind of your core purpose, your values, something that you can really point back to over time.
Right. One issue when it comes to leading a company that I know you're particularly strong on is promoting diversity, equity and inclusion, otherwise currently known as DEI. First of all, what does that look like when it comes to investing and encouraging people who don't invest, i.e. perhaps women or other people or other groups, in terms of getting that inclusion?
Well, I think that comes back to what we spoke about earlier, Simon, in terms of an engaging and easy to understand customer experience. So trying to bring people into investing who may traditionally not see themselves as people who know about it or find it too difficult to understand. So yes, one of the things that we did try to do at Kiwi Wealth is make it easier. We're obviously interested in that gender divide, and we commissioned a piece of research by the NZIER around retirement outcomes for males versus females. The sort of work I think the Retirement Commission has sort of done itself and carried on as well, which shows gaps of over 20%. So trying to sort of get people to engage, think that that's their money, work about what funds they ought to be in, these sorts of things were quite close to my heart. And didn't seem a bad way of using company resources.
How do you fix that gender divide that you just talked about in terms of retirement savings? Is there a way?
There are no quick fixes, and I wonder whether we'll ever entirely fix it. I mean, I think there's all sorts of things around, women in the workforce and where they might otherwise be, particularly when you go into sort of, the years where you might be parenting and so forth. But if you do have workforces or workplaces that are more inclusive, that are easier for people to come back and work when they've got other responsibilities to juggle, then I think you'll start to see higher participation of women in the workplace and of other backgrounds who might have different sort of domestic responsibilities or things they might want to be doing or showing up into the workplace to do. So trying to sort of change that, I think, makes a big difference to who comes into your workplace, who's contributing, and hopefully taking home a decent pay packet that they're putting into their KiwiSaver or whatever else for the long term. Speaking
of pay packets, do you have any opinion on the fact that one government under Labor was going to bring in mandatory pay gap reporting, but now that seems to have been shelved? Would mandatory pay gap reporting would that help in this instance?
Oh, I don't expect that question, Simon. As I look at Mind the Gap and so forth, which is at the moment obviously not mandatory, I do believe to a certain extent what gets measured gets done. So if you start to report those numbers and they're rather uncomfortable, you might be more minded to do something about it. Our gender pay gap at Kiwi Wealth when I was there was over 30%, which I thought was pretty shocking. quite surprising, it's 9%, I think generally, I think in financial services it's over 20, but in mine it was over 30. And, I was the CEO and, I was quite surprised to see it sort of being such a large gap. So it woke me up, I suppose, in terms of what can you do and what measures can you take.
So that transparency, so you're talking about that transparency or that light.
Yes.
Might change something.
I think transparency can help, and you'll see it in other stock exchanges, for example, around the world that make you start to report on these sorts of numbers, and I think it does tend to enact change if the people can see those differences.
What do you think now about the sort of current, the current period we are in with DEI? We see in America, it seems to be Donald Trump's wish to even purge DEI programs in the US public service. What do you think about, and it's also happening in companies like Meta as well, what do you think about that current sort of ethos?
I think it's quite short term, and maybe is a sign of the pendulum swinging back quite hard after a lot of progress over the last 5 to 10 years. And I think in the States, it's quite interesting. They've got quite a difficult relationship with, be it DEI or in its previous incarnation, it was sort of affirmative action, and they have had in the past quite a lot of quotas to try and fix equity issues, and that, it has mixed feelings in the US, which I think prides itself on also being highly meritocratic.
Yeah.
So I see those moves. I think it's, it's, if I was the president of the USA, which I clearly will never be, I wouldn't choose to eradicate those programs. So, sign of the times, sign of something that's going through. I suppose from my perspective, a little bit disappointing, but, these things will come through over time.
Right. What about the current climate in New Zealand? Do you see it being reflected here at all?
I don't think so that much at this stage, Simon, but at the same time you have to look to the US, and I think a lot of the things that happen in the US sort of socially and economically sort of ripple across the world. So yes, I suppose you wouldn't be surprised if these things ripple across into New Zealand in one way, shape or form. But I think in other ways, there are a lot of companies who are a long way down the road with these sorts of initiatives, and I don't think they'll be minded to pull it all back in a sort of a meta-style way.
Right. Yeah.
But maybe there'll be other companies who decide just to kick down the can down the road, and they were thinking about doing something in that space, and they think, actually, we don't need to do it now. So, it might slow things down.
Yep. Okay. All right. Look, I'll let you go soon. Just a couple more questions, though. I know you've only just begun in the consulting world in terms of, coaching new CEOs. But you have had that taste of being a CEO, haven't you?
Yeah.
So I wonder whether there'll be a time when you want to get your hands on a company again.
I wonder that too, Simon. Never say never. A lot of the reason why I'm back at home, doing this at the moment was a work-life balance call, and I've spent the last couple of years spending an awful lot more time with my children, which I have enjoyed immensely, and I think is rewarding. I do think to myself, is this what I'm going to do for the next 10 years or not? Am I going to see it through? My youngest is now 7, so do I see it through for 11 more years? I actually genuinely don't know the answer to that.
Right.
But at the moment, I'm pretty happy with the path. I'm enjoying building up this business. I'm trying to create something that's sort of scalable. If I pull it off, fantastic. If I don't, then maybe I'll be back on the job market trying to get someone to give me something to do.
Okay, so I wonder where that might be. Would the lure of being a CEO overseas be too much? Would we lose you?
Oh, that's a good question. No, you wouldn't. I'm pretty dedicated to New Zealand. I'm even dedicated to Wellington, which is probably very career limiting.
And that wraps up this episode of the NBR Podcast. As mentioned, it's our 50th, half a century already of hopefully compelling business people and issues. Thanks to the content team of Michael Hickmott, Joseph Hisayasu and Jake Latham for making it happen, and to the editorial team for supporting the pod. As usual, any social media clips used are listed in the episode description. And to get early access to new episodes, subscribe at nbr.co.nz. Up next, making numbers sexy. I'm Simon Shepherd. We'll catch you then.